Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and this Friday it's just going to be Chad and I watching, as we are 3 weeks and 6 days away from opening day, which I know we are both very, very excited for. Chad's wearing his Los Angeles Dodgers. I do not have any Yankee paraphernalia on me today that's visible. I may or may not be wearing Yankees underwear. I don't know. We're not going to talk about my underwear.
I mean, we're trying to get people to actually listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I'm so excited. I'm going to spring training next Wednesday. It's my first time ever going to spring training. I feel like it's a rite of passage, and I'm super jacked. I've got my kid Evan's prepared to say Mookie Betts. I'm a big fan. Will you sign my baseball?
It's such a big. That's so cool. It's so fun. I actually learned about this last night. I knew Chad was going to be missing the podcast, but I was trying to see. I guess I didn't know why he was missing the podcast, and then I emailed, because actually we booked a big guest for next week. John Ondresic. I should probably figure out how to pronounce his last name before I interview him. But he's from Five for Fighting, which you'll remember the song Superman, 100 Years, some good music there. He's going to be performing at the Fargo Theater, and he did a music video about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I think is interesting. And I want to ask him some questions too about it. It's got to be difficult as an entertainer, whether you're like a professional sports athlete or a musician or what have you, to sort of diverge from music into politics. I mean, that's fraught ground, and people have opinions about it, usually hinging on whether or not they agree with what's being said.
Right.
So I want to ask him some questions about that. And of course, he does have his event coming up. I think it's March 26th at the Fargo Theater. He's going to be performing. So that'll be next week. I think Thursday we had to do it on Thursday, so that might replace the Friday show. Anyway, let's get into some things going on right now. First and foremost, Perry Schaefer, former NDGOP chairman, who was narrowly defeated by the current NDGOP chair, Sandy Sanford, has started a new venture, I guess political committee, or it's actually more than one committee. It's a multi-candidate committee, and it's a political action committee. It's called the Legendary Fund. And what he said in a memo to potential donors, potential funders of his effort, is that they're going to take on the ultra-right or the extreme right of the party. So, I mean, this is basically all this talk that you and I have had about, the divide between, sort of the MAGA crowd and the normies, the traditional Republicans. This is the normies kind of fighting back. Now, he has said this is not an attempt to, necessarily fight the party. It's not necessarily an attack on Sandy Sanford. And, I think that's true to a point. I do think, though, it's mostly about sort of reasserting, getting the normies organized and getting them back in the process, because right now they've been getting their asses kicked by the MAGA side. So it's an interesting development in state politics.
The question becomes, what does it look like? Like what's
do?
the work that the PAC does, or the independent expenditure? Because if it's just doing a mail program or doing ads or giving contributions to these incumbent legislators or traditional Republicans, it's not a shortage of resources that they have.
Yeah.
It's a shortage of having people who are willing to take action on their behalf. And so I hope that Perry and his team are thinking about, what does this look like in terms of get out the vote in June? What does this look like in terms of persuading at the doors? It's like what we talked about our last show with Burgum and the super PAC and spending all that money. At some point it's spending good money after bad if you're not actually out talking to folks.
I hope, and I don't know what they're going to do. Schaefer I was aware that something like this was in the offing. And And Schaefer was surprised when I called him. He was like, "How did you get that?" And I was like, "Perry, I get everything. What are you talking about?" Of course, I was going to hear about this. So there, I don't know. I mean, there wasn't a lot of like specific mission plan. I'm sure that's something that I think their meeting is today. So I'm sure that's something that attendees will be talking about. What I hope is, I mean, to your point, I mean, if it's just about buying billboards or something, I don't think that moves the needle. I think it's got to be about the reason why, the Perry Schaefer's wing of the party, the normies, aren't winning is there is a deficit in their people showing up. They're not showing up at local district conventions. They're not showing up to elect district chairs. They're not showing up to elect delegates or to be delegates at conventions. I think with one place, maybe arguably, they're still showing up on primary day. To a point, except arguably, but not in every case, because we look at Senator Jessica Bell from the 2022 cycle, who was unseated, and I'm certain there's some other examples we could cite too.
Senator Elke,
Dave Elke,
Devil's Lake.
That's right, Devil's Lake area. So I mean, that could, it's not perfect. I guess I was thinking more the statewide primary. I mean, we haven't seen it showing up there yet, but we're also gonna test that this cycle. I mean, Rick Becker is going to be finally on the June primary, and we're finally going to see, because he still had the excuse when he made it to the general election ballot. He was running as an independent. He said, "I didn't have the R behind my name, and that did me in." We'll see. He's going to be on the June primary ballot. He's going to have the R behind his name.
If I had to bet right now who wins the House, the congressional primary, my money would be on Rick Becker at this point. He's got the highest name ID. We're not seeing much from Campbell. I think we'll see more from Julie coming up. But, I mean, Becker's probably the best position to win this primary at this point.
I think it's
we're only 3.5 months out.
I think it's fair to say that it's his race to lose right now. I mean, Fedorchuk's got some ground to make up if she's going to do it. And that's scary, because I think that would be a terrible, terrible mistake for the state of North Dakota to send somebody like Rick Becker to Congress. But, and
I think it opens up the door for Trygve. If the general election is Trygve Hammer versus Rick Becker, I think all of a sudden you've got a really interesting race between somebody who a lot of Republicans don't like and a Democrat who I think will be palatable to a lot of Republicans.
I think that's fair. So that's going to be an interesting race to watch. But I mean, as far as Schaefer, I think this sort of an effort should have even started upstream. I mean, this should have started last year. And it should have started with really what they need to be doing is they need to be making lists of people who are going to be reliable supporters for the normie cause, and get them out to conventions, get them out to vote. I mean, that's the number one thing. It's a get out the vote thing. That's got to be the focus. Will it be? I don't know. It's really easy, I think, to collect a bunch of money, hire somebody to design a mailer, and then send it out. That's easy, and it's not going to work. I mean, we've tried it. It's not going to. I say we. They have tried it. Doug Burgum tried it. It didn't work.
Well, and I would say, I don't know if you saw, there's another email from the Brandon Pritchard group yesterday attacking 29 of his House colleagues on school choice. And again, this is something that you and I disagree on. We can have conversations about it, but these people, the email was, these 29 members of House don't care about freedom. They don't care about these things, like just over the top. I mean, they're organized. The Pritchard people are organized to attack the normies. And most of those were like rural Republicans who, quite frankly, school choice doesn't benefit rural districts in the same way it does urban districts.
But the problem
represent their constituents.
Right, but the problem right now is Pritchard's talking in a vacuum. So we can talk about that he's inaccurate, that he's not really the sort of person that you want to put a lot of stock in, given the way he behaves himself on social media and elsewhere. But right now, he's the only one who's organized and talking to people who are attending these local conventions. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a little afraid. In some ways, the other sort of news this morning is that NDGOP chair Sandy Sanford sent out an email blast to Republicans where she's being critical of people who are choosing to skip the convention. And I mean, the obvious target there is Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller, who has said that she's going to skip the NDGOP convention. So far, she is not showing up at local district events. In fact, her campaign has been not very happy at me for pointing that out. But I mean, it's a thing that's happening. She's opting out of the process. But you could also cite some legislative candidates. I'm thinking like Representative John Nelson, Representative Robin Wise, Senator Jerry Klein in District 14.
Well, Rob, I would say they went to their convention. They were
did. Well, that's
physically
true.
there.
But they also opted. They're not going to abide by the results, and they're going to the June primary. Which, by the way, every single and there are. I mean, when Sanford does in her email name every single statewide Republican candidate: Kelly Armstrong, Julie Fedorchak, Tom Campbell, even Rick Becker. She calls them out. I mean, they're at least attending the convention. Now, they've all also committed to going to June. To the June primary. So whether they win or lose at the convention, they're not abiding by the convention results, but at least they're showing up and talking. Miller's not, and specifically not named at all. So, I mean, it's hard not to say. When you name everybody but her, that's who the message is about, right? And I think some of that's self-serving from Sanford. The convention process is obviously, her faction of the party's base of power is the convention process. So they want
not to mention a state part for the chairman of a state party. It's sort of their show as well, right? I mean, you have an event like that flops. People think you're an incompetent leader. So I think she's got a vested. I mean, they've got former Governor Huckabee. I assume isn't going to draw a big crowd, but what do I know? He doesn't appeal to me. So I think she's probably nervous that people aren't going to show up.
Yeah. It'd be, I think that was more of a concern, and then some of these races got pretty competitive, and maybe it's less of a concern now. But I mean, they also jacked up the price of attending. I mean, I've heard lots of people complaining. I mean, it's like a 75% hike in what it costs to go.
And do you have to pay to participate in the presidential caucus as well? Do you have to be a member? Is there?
You don't have to. So that's kind of a funny thing. I was talking to Bob Harms, who is organizing the caucus event for the party, and one of the things that he said, they're kind of doing it like Disneyland. If you're a party member, you get to like skip the line. Oh, and you get to have like a priority line if you're a party member, and if you're not a party member, you could still participate, but you got to stand in line like a peasant.
Democracy.
Yeah. That's so that's how they're doing that. By the way, as an aside, not that I want to digress into this too far, I know the Democrats are holding a mail-in primary. The Republicans are doing a caucus. The Democrats are doing a mail-in primary. But they do have two voting locations. But like they're open for like one day from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. or something. And it's only at Dunseith, which is on the Turtle Mountain Reservation. And I think it's at the casino at Spirit Lake, on the Spirit Lake Reservation. Don't quote me on. Go to the Democratic Party. I'm citing this from memory. I don't want to misinform people if you're interested in voting. But I wonder why. I mean, why only those two locations if you're going to have in-person voting locations at all? That seemed odd to me.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that when there's been competitive presidential race, state-run caucuses with the North Dakota Democrats in the past, they've been fun. Like I remember, I worked for unsuccessful presidential candidates in 2004 and 2008. And those events were fun. Like there's thousands and thousands of people in line waiting to vote. And what a great way to build the party and build the database. I'm sure the GOP is going, well, probably maybe not. I don't know how many people are going to show up with a Haley versus Trump, but it's a good process for North Dakota and for the state parties, even though it's not very democratic.
Yeah, you can sort of point at. I mean, the normies in other states. I mean, Nikki has been getting, a third to 40% of the vote in some of these states. I mean, we're going to find out how much that holds. I mean, we have North Dakota votes Monday, and then you have Super Tuesday, where you have, I think it's 16 states in a U.S. territory, Guam, I think. Yeah. Vote on Super Tuesday. So, I mean, we're going to find out very quickly. But, I mean, if it continues where a third of the Republican Party continues to vote for Nikki Haley, that should be alarm bells for Donald Trump. Because, yes, he's winning landslides, but he's also running as a de facto incumbent. I mean, he's there is a small but significant portion of the party that just doesn't seem willing to acquiesce.
Yeah, I mean, I still go back to the whole question of this presidential election, and man, we're getting off topic now, but here we are, is what do anti-Trumpers do in terms of voting? Do they stay home? Do they vote for third party or whatever? And what does the Democrat base, often people of color, are they motivated to get out and vote, or are they too frustrated with the president over Gaza, over not doing enough on Black Lives Matter, or what? I mean, I think it's turnout on the D side, and then what do traditional Republicans do, anti-Trumpers do. That's going to determine the election in probably 5 states.
But let's bring it back home again, because we just talked about, what happens if Republicans nominate Rick Becker for the United States House, who's a very Trumpian figure, has already vowed. I mean, about the only concrete thing he has said that he will do in Congress so far is join the Freedom Caucus, which is sort of the epicenter of intransigence and dysfunction in the House of Representatives. So
he'll fit in well. There's no doubt.
Right. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but I mean, you wonder. I mean, are there moderate Republicans who can make their peace with a candidate like Trygve Hammer? And by the way, what are Democrats going to do to make a place for those voters in their party? Because, I mean, in order for that to happen, it can't just be Republicans are dissatisfied with their candidate. If Democrats want them as voters, Democrats have to give those voters something. Right. What is that going to be? Now I think Trygve Hammer, given his, sort of blue collar voting record,
military
background, the fact that he is something of a populist himself, I think it's fair to say. I don't want to pigeonhole him, make it sound like a Trump populist, but he has kind of the blue collar working man, working person patina on him. So it's a good start. But, on policy, I think he's really going to have to think about what can he talk about to attract those voters, because he may have a real opportunity.
And that's assuming that those voters in the short term care about policy, or if it's just about, we know we don't like Rick Becker, this guy's a military guy, this guy's worked in the oil fields, he seems like somebody who would be okay. I mean, I don't think those people are going to stay with the Democrats if they vote for Trygve one time. And I often think about, I think Republicans or people crossing over, either way, they might cross over for one election. But when they start crossing over for too many, it makes them feel uncomfortable. But I think 1 is the max, the most likely 0.
Okay, but how do we explain then the number of people? Because we had a lot of crossover voters who were voting for, once upon a time, voting for John Hoeven for governor and Kent Conrad for senator in like almost 70% figures. I mean,
they crossed over once. Republicans voted for Kent Conrad. Democrats voted for John Hoeven. I don't think they crossed over that much.
Okay, but since then they're not voting anymore. I guess how many elections have we had since 2010?
My point is that if they cross over, it's generally for one, but more likely than not, they're not going to cross over.
Yeah. There is
it's so polarized. It's hard.
One frustrating thing that I've heard, or not frustrating, one indication of frustration, I should say, I have heard from a lot of Republican voters is that they feel like North Dakota Republicans maybe deserve to lose a few elections, or lose a couple of races, if for no other reason to force a correction in the party. Because right now, I think one thing that's enabling, some of the demagogues to indulge themselves is that there's no consequences for it.
Right.
And what's allowing voters to indulge it is there's no consequences for them either. We run up massive budget deficits. The budgeting process is a mess. We're not there, but there's still enough work getting done where Americans aren't necessarily feeling the full brunt of this dysfunction. I'm not going to say that some people haven't struggled with things like inflation and whatnot, but it's not enough. I mean, it's not enough to wake people up and say, listen, we need something functional. Like, nobody's feeling any pain from any of this. And you take
it back to North Dakota, it's even more so, right? People aren't feeling pain. I mean, by and large, people in North Dakota are happy. The reality is taxes are low. People have jobs. There's not a lot to complain about. And so that allows the Brandon Pritchards and other people in districts that are 80% Republican to sort of get away with some of this stuff. voters are going to have to lose patience. And the problem is, I don't know how many voters are paying attention to legislative races a year before the election to lose patience on this stuff.
Yeah.
I brought up an email that Brandon Pritchard sent out about 29 legislators. How many people in the state actually read that email?
Right.
There's 100 of us.
Right. Well, I mean, it's probably a large percentage of this podcast's audience, but I think we always have that caveat. You and I and the people who listen to this podcast religiously, we're not normal. We're not normal voters.
No matter what Rob says about you listeners of the podcast, I find you normal.
We're weirdos. And I embrace it. I am a weirdo. I know that. So the other interesting thing that happened this week, in the context of these primary and caucus votes, is that Secretary of State Michael Howe, who is what I don't want to put words in his mouth or whatever, but who I would characterize fairly, I think, as a normie Republican, who, by the way, has been direct and on the record that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, made it clear that that's not necessarily the result that he enjoyed,
Right.
but he made it clear, he won the election. I think Michael Howe's a stand-up guy. I think he was a great choice for Secretary of State. He sent out a press release this week, and the purpose of the press release, I think, was a pretty normal thing, and wouldn't even hardly be worth mentioning. Just pointing out that the Republican caucus and the Democratic primary are being run by the party. So if people have problems voting or whatever, there's nothing really.
Don't call me.
Right. Well, and I mean, you put it that way, but I mean, he's also, that's an important thing for voters to know. The Secretary of State, the state of North Dakota, is not running these votes.
Right.
So if you have problems, there's nothing they can really do to help you. It's being run by the parties, and I'm not saying that there will be problems, but you know what I mean. But in that, he kind of starts there, and then he diverges into this talk that there are people who are going to look at these votes and say, oh, look at, hand counting works here. Therefore, we can do hand counting and get rid of the electronic tabulation machines and everything else at the state level. And I mean, he's kind of talking to people who are increasingly maybe convinced or curious about these claims of election fraud or whatever. And it just, when I was reading this, it made me think what an uncomfortable position he must be in. Because you have his own party that rejected electronic voting for their state convention based on conspiracy. I mean, they don't even trust themselves, to run an election. And I will tell you, electronic voting would have been a godsend to somebody who has sat through interminable votes at these conventions where they got to print the ballots and then distribute the ballots, and then they fill out the ballots, and then they collect the ballots, and then they count the ballots, and everybody's sitting around for an hour waiting for this to happen.
And then they bring a district the wrong amount of ballots, or too many ballots, or not enough ballots,
or we have a protracted debate about who can be listed on the ballot. I mean, point of order.
The ballot. Do you not sign the ballot?
I mean, some of that's just what you're going to get at a working convention like that. Yeah. Especially when you have 2,000 plus people in the room who are delegates. But the other thing, I mean, it could have been a lot quicker, but they rejected it. They didn't want to do it. And I'm just thinking and we also have a ballot measure where they're circulating. It's Republicans from the MAGA wing that are backing this ballot measure. And that's some of the things that the ballot measure does a lot of dubious and often self-contradictory things. But a couple of the things it does is it bans electronic voting, which we do not. Ultimately, every North Dakotan votes on a paper ballot. We do have, I think, some electronic tools that are to say like people who are blind or whatever can use to. But ultimately, every vote in North Dakota is recorded on a paper ballot. They're tabulated by electronic machines, but this ballot measure would ban that process. And so you have Howe kind of sitting here, where it's members of his own party who are promoting this stuff. And someone like Howe, I'm thinking of the choice he has to make, Chad. You could go along with it, right? You could just either, be quiet or just kind of let the cranks and the partisans have their say, or you could stand up for North Dakota's election process, which I think has stood the test of time. It has been vetted. It is reliable. And in a way also, Howe standing up for his staff, many of whom have been working elections in North Dakota probably since Michael Howe was in high school.
Yeah. Well, and Michael Howe didn't just send out this press release. He was also in, I think, it's a North Dakota Monitor article, really being critical of the initiated measure that's being circulated to do all those things. I mean, he was very, very critical of that, which I appreciated. But he was also very clear in that article that he's going to treat these people fairly. If they collect the signatures, he'll make sure it gets on the ballot. He will treat it that way. But again, I think to Michael's credit, he said the presidential election was not stolen. He is standing up for election workers, not just in his office, but around the state, who often are the ones who are taking the brunt of this, of angry voters or accusations. We talked about the Eddy County auditor and how they quit because of all this sort of garbage going on. There's lots of tinfoil hats when it comes to how elections are run. North Dakota is very lucky that we have very, very good systems in place. Michael Howe and the election workers around the state do a very, very good job. And I can't for the life of me, Rob, in election after election after election, that conservatives win in this state. If there's some grand conspiracy to take over elections, like, progressives wouldn't continue to lose everything except for steal the presidential election. It defies logic. So kudos to Michael Howe for coming out and standing up for his staff. And I trust our election process, even though my candidates lose the vast majority of the times in North Dakota.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is you have so many people who are basing their judgment of these things on the outcome. You know, and it's if the outcome isn't the outcome that I want, then somebody must have cheated.
But Rob, Trump got like 70% of the vote in North Dakota.
Well, but he lost nationally. You know, and all this stuff gets nationalized. You know that.
Yeah, I do know that, but it's just ridiculous to think that there's something wrong with North Dakota's system.
Yeah, I'm not defending it.
Won 70% of the vote. It's asinine.
I'm not defending it. I have the utmost.
Well, I know you're not.
I have the utmost confidence in our election system. You know, even at the end of the day, like, could something go wrong with the electronic counting machines?
Of course,
it could. Sure. I mean, anything is no system is perfect, but we also have a backup. Like, we keep the paper ballots. They can go back to the ballots if they needed to, you know, if the situation called for it, you know. So there's that movement of people who just take it as an article of faith. All of our institutions are corrupt. Everything needs to be torn down. And I wanted to call that out, because that's got to be as somebody, by the way, a Republican, you know, who is often like, I'm not going to go down that road with you. I'm going to stand up. I'm looking at this stuff and I'm going to believe my eyeballs rather than the press releases or the tweets being put out by the partisans. It's got to be a lonely spot. So I wanted to, Howe probably doesn't appreciate us shining a light on what he's doing. I'm not sure that makes his job any easier, but I mean, at some point we have to stand up for the people who are doing the right thing, and he's doing the right thing on this.
He is doing the right thing, and he's been on this podcast talking about doing the right thing several times. Yes. And so, standing up for his staff, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's the people who are answering the phones or at the front desk as people come in with their video cameras rolling and making accusations and crazy stuff. Michael gets that those are the people who are having to deal with this garbage.
Yeah. Yeah, because he could play ball with them, and he's not going. I mean, in some ways, politically, in this moment, it would be easier for him to do that. But he's choosing the hard thing because it's the right thing, and good for him.
Yep.
All right, the other thing, I want to talk about the Industrial Commission. And they just recently approved a grant, $300,000, to develop an education and marketing program for carbon capture. And as you can imagine, given that there is a very active campaign against carbon capture in North Dakota that consists of a strange alliance between kind of far left environmentalists and far right climate change deniers. Not everybody in the movement are in those two camps, but I mean, there's a lot of overlap there. They're not happy about this. As a fiscal conservative, I will tell you that I'm not super excited about this sort of thing. I want to provide some context. This sort of thing is not unusual in that, you think of like the checkoff programs. You remember those Got Milk commercials? Those are so creepy. I didn't like those at all. But, they were paid for by, to promote milk by a government program that taxes dairy producers. In fact, there was even some dairy farmers sued, like they didn't want to be taxed too.
They didn't want to do the checkoff, and the beef checkoff has always been somewhat controversial.
Right, and there's remember the other white meat, that's the pork people. Soybeans I think do some stuff, probably not as prominently. There's a lot of this stuff that goes around. So this is essentially the Industrial Commission. The legislature took some revenues from the energy industry and are using it. And I mean, I don't know that anybody in the energy industry is complaining about this, but I'm not super excited about this. But where this gets controversial, I think, is that the contract, and I'm reading now from a North Dakota Monitor story about this, and they wrote, I quote, so AE2S got the contract to do the marketing and all that, and then I'm going to quote now from the story. The proposal from AE2S included the use of the Fieldstone Group, part owned by conservative talk radio host and columnist Scott Hennon. Hennon also helped organize Friends of Ag and Energy, which has a website about carbon capture, and hosted a public meeting that included Wade Beauchamps of Summit Carbon Solutions. Burgum also spoke at the forum. Now, the reason I have a problem with this is Scott Hennon's in the same business that I'm in, which is basically political commentary. I would like to think that there's a significant gap between what my work product is and what his work product is, but ostensibly, we're both doing the same thing. I would never, Chad, start a consulting organization to go out and solicit business from and get funding from the same people that I'm like questioning and interviewing and writing about. I would never do that. And I want to premise this right now. I'm going to tell you, I am all in on carbon capture. I think it's a very important technology. I think it's an important industry in and of itself for our state. I think what it portends in terms of, helping existing industries like ethanol, agriculture, energy, exist into a future where there's a demand for lower carbon output. I think it's hugely important. I'm all in on this. And the reason I don't go out and solicit money, or like go out and form a consulting group where I essentially sell my ability to write nice things about you to people, the reason I don't do that is so that when I tell you I'm all in on carbon capture and carbon pipelines and everything, is so that you know that that's a result of my considered opinion and not who put a nickel in my piggy bank.
So it's interesting you talk about nickels. I think I've heard Scott Hennon referred to as being coin operated because he will often be parroting talking points of somebody who's giving him some cash. So it's all very, very interesting. I too am all in for carbon capture because I believe if we're going to move this country forward in dealing with climate change, that's one of the tools to move us forward. And so it's an important part of it. I too have an issue with this. First of all, AE2S is an engineering firm. I'm not exactly sure why an engineering firm is getting money to do marketing to promote this. And I don't like the idea of somebody like Scott Hennon who hates the government so much and thinks the government should be smaller unless they're writing him a check to do their bidding for them. It all is a little bit gross to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you have any feel for why AE2S, an engineering firm, would be, are they involved in building the pipeline?
Well, AE2S, I know, and a lot, not just them. A lot of these engineering firms, they kind of have like a full, like they'll go out and they'll go to like a local government and say, oh, you guys need a water park. And then they'll like help the whole thing. Like they'll have, they'll develop the plans to build it. They'll help organize the political campaign behind it. In fact, there was a controversy, I think, up in Grand Forks involving, and I'm forgetting the name of the contractor, but it was another like engineering firm. And they were essentially like they consulted with the city. Like the city said, oh, do we need another school? And so they go to this firm and this firm says, yes, you need another school. And then the firm also puts in the bid to build the school. And then they also, are running the political campaign to get voters to vote to build the new school. And these are conflicts of interest. So
Rob, that happens every time there's a school built. And One of my biggest frustrations is exactly that. This firm that we're paying money in school districts to run the campaign. At the end of the day, win or lose, it's not a big deal for them. If they win, they get this huge contract. If they lose, they just go on their way after getting paid to do the political campaign. So this idea, it's sort of like when sometimes I'll have people from around the country reach out to me and say, hey, we're thinking about, doing an initiated measure in North Dakota or something like that. What do you think? And I often say, I don't want to have this conversation because you as a political consultant have a vested interest in moving forward with this because you will have a contract through the election. I mean, I don't understand, why would you hire an engineering firm who doesn't have a professional? Well, I'm sure they have professional PR people, but it all, to your point, it all seems icky to me that that we have these things going on.
I mean, and again, I'm speaking also as a member of the news media, right? It's very important to me because I'll tell you, I mean, you do this job long enough, you get accused of being paid off. People have told me I'm in Doug Burgum's pocket. Which probably comes as a surprise to Doug Burgum, given how often I am a pain in his ass. I've been told that I'm in the oil industry's pocket. I've been told I'm in the Democrats' pocket, that I've been paid off now by the Democrats. I've even been accused of being paid off by Forum Communications Company, although that one is true. I do get a paycheck from the Forum Communications Company. So, yes, you caught me. I am paid off. I just don't understand. You can't be on both sides of that issue. Like you can't be getting the money and doing the business and also providing commentary and interviewing the politicians. I don't ever want to be in a position to accept money from a politician that I'm also covering.
But Rob, when Scott gives commentary on this stuff, is he transparent about the fact that he's a paid spokesperson?
I don't think so.
I mean, you've seen those commercials on TV where it says paid spokesperson.
I've read his columns too, where I haven't seen anything about I haven't seen anything disclosing the fact. Now I don't know. Maybe those were written before this contract came through. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, maybe the Forum should start charging Hennon advertising space in their publications when he writes a column.
No comment. But
I'd love to put you in a position where you have to comment on your employer.
My employer is fantastic. They're very good at what they do, and they're very scrupulous about this sort of thing. I am calling this out. I mean, it's wrong. It's wrong. This should not be happening. And somebody else brought up a point like with Republicans should be concerned about this sort of thing because we're just coming through and Jason Doctor is facing a state representative. Jason Doctor from Bismarck is facing a misdemeanor criminal charge for a cozy deal that his real estate development / landlord company got for a sweetheart deal on a lease from the state of North Dakota. And I don't know if what he did rises to the level of a crime. That he'll have his day in court. That'll be up. I'm not a lawyer. That'll be up to them. I know as a taxpayer it was wrong. I don't know if it's a crime, but it's wrong.
But Rob, nobody's gotten in trouble yet. Jason Doctor's still sitting in his legislative seat. Nico Rios is still sitting in his legislative seat.
There's an argument to be made that Republicans have grown which maybe brings us full circle back to what we were talking about, where there's no consequences for any of this. Nobody's paying a price for any of this. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's just that the voters are checked out. I don't know if the voters are just so hyper partisan they don't care. At least our grafted corruption is our grafted corruption. As long as the Democrats aren't doing it, we're okay with it.
But I think it comes down to the factions. The traditional normie Republicans, Jason Doctor is one of their folks.
Sure.
Right? They're not going to go after him. Nico Rios is one of the Bastiat type folks. And we saw that. We saw that with Sandy Sanford. We saw that with Luke Simons. We saw all these people who were defending Nico Rios as the traditional Republicans were going after him. We've got the Bastiats going after Doctor. I mean, it's tribalism, but within the Republican Party.
I want to point out that I called for both Rios and Doctor to resign. I don't think either of them should be in elected office anymore. I have a high bar for this. Being in these offices is a privilege. Nobody owns that office. Nobody's entitled to be there. And when you disgrace yourself, the frustrating thing for me is I feel like I'm alone in some of this stuff. Like I'm the factions kind of line up, but like, where's the outrage from just the average voter? Like, this is happening in your community. This is happening in your state. Why aren't you upset about this?
I think we've created a situation in our state and in our country where we always say that politicians are corrupt or politicians are bad or whatever. So people, when they actually do bad things, people are like, yeah, here they go again. And so I think there's an importance of what we just talked about with Michael Howe, of raising up the elected officials who are doing really, really good jobs. So the public starts to understand they're really good people in these offices, and we should have a higher expectations, not just assumed every one of them is bad.
Yeah. I think there's something to that. I've even argued, and I mean, I don't want to blame what's happened on the right, on the left, because it's the right's problem, not the left's problem. But I mean, we've talked about, constantly calling every Republican presidential candidate, even the Honorable Mitt Romney, George W. Bush, they were all racist. They were all misogynist. They were all terrible, horrible people. And then an actual terrible, horrible person comes along, and we've been crying wolf so long. Paul Ryan wants to murder the elderly. We've been crying wolf for so long that an actually repugnant person comes along, and we blame it. Well, of course they say that. They're the liberal media. And the thing is... The thing is the liberal media, they weren't giving anybody a break. The New York Times wasn't giving anybody a break. They weren't. John McCain. I remember when the New York Times was running articles about, well, maybe John McCain's not qualified to be president. He was born in the Panama Canal Zone. It was their own version of birtherism, and they got away with stuff like that. But, and that doesn't justify what's happening on the right. Everybody is responsible for what they do. But man, have we created a mess, and everybody's hands are dirty.
I think there's truth to that. I mean, and here we are, right? And here we are.
Nobody trusts anybody.
Yep. And if the messenger is somebody who I disagree with, they're full of crap on everything that they say. We've gone into our own algorithms on social media, our own. I sometimes flip between MSNBC and Fox News. It's different. People are literally living in different worlds. Yeah, literally living in different worlds depending on which channel they're watching. And I would just encourage people to turn off cable news. It makes life better.
Because I experience this all the time where I don't read social media. Like, I post on social media and I'll interact with people who tweet at me or who comment on Facebook. I don't read my timelines because I don't like the algorithms. I don't like what it's surfacing to me. I have a few, like my daughter and some family members that I check in on their pages to see, whose birthday it is or whatever, but I don't read it for like news. I don't do it. And I don't watch, if I watch television at all, I watch like specific shows on Netflix, and that's it. I don't watch cable news. I don't watch. And so I'm very weird in that way. And it's interesting to me to kind of watch how other people, when people start seeing like television ads and stuff, a lot of times I don't see them. Like I rely on other people to tell me about them, or I look them up on YouTube or something. I don't experience a lot of this stuff the way other people do. And maybe that's why I'm so flippin' weird. But I don't. And I'll tell you, it is so much. I feel like I am a lot happier than the political people I know that just obsess about what's on Twitter, or obsess about Facebook, or obsess about, what Sean Hannity said last night, or what Rachel Maddow said last night. It doesn't matter.
Right. And it's sort of the breaking news sort of cycle that we're living in too. I mean, you flip through the cable news and everything's breaking news. And it's like, it's not all that interesting.
Yeah.
But everything
there is perpetually a breaking news banner on, like, you turn on cable news, you turn cable news 2:00 in the morning, there's breaking news about something.
But it's breaking news that's been breaking for 72 straight hours.
Right.
Broken. It's broken.
It's out there, guys. Everything is cranked up to 11 all the time. So anyway, I don't think that anything's going to change with this Industrial Commission vote, because we live in a post-shame era and nobody ever admits that they did something wrong. Nobody ever reconsiders something. Maybe they do it privately. I don't know. But I would tell you, I would never take money like that. And that's what allows me to look in the mirror at the end of the day and be satisfied with my work product, that it was the result of me, and not, who put a quarter in me and made me Carbon capture is good. I don't do that.
That was actually a really good robot impression.
You like that? I was even doing the hands. If you could see the video
this is the time where we need a visual medium.
We need a
so
visual
can see
medium.
your ability to do a robot impression.
The rest of the time is to see two balding, chubby men sitting at their desks.
I take offense to that. I'm not balding. I'm bald, Rob.
You're bald. That's right.
I've finished the job.
I am balding. I just got every time I get a haircut too. Although I can't decide if the balding looks worse when my hair's cut or when I let it grow too long.
It always okay. Now I'm gonna give you some advice as somebody who's been balding and bald for a long time.
Okay.
When you grow it out, it always looks worse.
Does it?
Like, I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about every person who's balding.
I don't grow it out. I just don't like going to get my hair cut. It's like kind of a chore. So sometimes my hair gets a little long, but I usually wear a baseball hat, when I'm out in public. But
yeah, and here's the other thing: shave it off, Rob. Then you get to just do it yourself.
Yeah,
this is haircut by Oban right here.
Haircut by Oban. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'm ready for that. I'm not. I have seen the shape of my skull, and I'm not sure that I kind of feel like clinging to what hair I have left is maybe the best
approach. There's a lot of people right now who are like, God, I'm glad I stuck around.
I am sure glad I hung around to the 45-minute mark on this podcast so I could hear this scintillating discussion. We're going to end it there. Please don't consider the last 5 minutes if you're going to rate or review the podcast. Please consider the first 40 minutes of the podcast and not the last 5 minutes. See, we put this crap at the end so you don't have to listen to it at the beginning.
Unless you appreciate my advice on balding men, I'm happy. I'll answer questions every week. Put them in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. I guess we'll see if anything comes of that. All right. We are going to end this because this is getting ridiculous. All right. Podcast over. Next week, Chad won't be on, but I'll be on, and we'll talk about some stuff, and it'll be fun. Thanks for listening, and
go Dodgers.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.